What's up, world? Let me tell you about this beard growth oil I got from 12 tribes on Earth. 8 ounces of oily goodness with a nozzle that prevents sprays and spills, and soft ingredients that make it perfect addition to anyone's morning routine. From coconut to castor, all these oils are hand chosen. After using this herbal blend, the biggest thing I noticed is how soft, how strong my hair was, and how good I feel. Pick up your bottle today and make your beard the star of the show.
Shalom, family. Good to see you all here. Hope you're doing well. Well, it's happening, y'all. And I think it's been happening for a while, but the US is being cut off from a lot of things now. I know the EU had a meeting a few weeks ago and they purposely went out of their way not to invite the US. And a lot of companies, and I told y'all this a few months ago, stopped doing business with the US over those tariffs. When Donald Trump came out with those tariffs in 2025, when he first came in office, a lot of nations cut ties with spending for US goods. That's why US goods are no longer moving. Nobody is buying them. So Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, and them figure, okay, well, nobody's buying. What can we do? That's when they decided to invade Venezuela. And now they are still eyeing Cuba. You ain't going to believe what they're doing to them Cubans. I might have to do an update. They are still going through blackout. The only thing they are allowed is 3 hours a day of electricity. 3 hours a day. That's it. So they got to do everything they possibly can in that 3 hour period before the power goes out. And yes, Donald Trump is still talking about taking over Cuba. So there are a few updates on that. That's a disgrace. I don't think I could make it on 3 hours a day with all the things I do on a regular basis. Yeah, that would be next to impossible. But this is what he's doing to them. So a lot of allies are no longer interested in trading with the US. They're not interested in doing any deals with the US. And we're pretty much cut off, y'all. So this situation is about to get worse. We are just seeing part of it with these high prices and the war going on, but it's about to get worse as the world continues to shut the US out. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Please give me a one if you can see my screen. Thank you.
"40 nations are currently in talks to basically cut the United States, because of Donald Trump, out of global trade. There are 195 recognized nations/countries on planet Earth. 195. 40 of them, led by Canada, banding together to just cut out the United States. So more than 1/5 of the planet working on a way to not have to deal with the United States anymore. This includes our neighbors to the north, Canada, our neighbors to the south, Mexico. This includes the European Union and the United Kingdom. This includes major Asian countries like Japan. According to these reports, and again, this is kind of all being, spearheaded by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, what they're trying to do is avoid all of the tariffs that Donald Trump has put in place on everybody. And then, of course, they have typically had to do reciprocal tariffs. So everything for them gets more expensive because they're dealing with the United States. So all of these nations have gotten together and said, wow, dealing with the United States is expensive and it's costing us business. How do we get around that? And their solution is, well, what if we all just trade with each other and not these idiots? And that is currently what they're working on. So instead of relying on the US market to sell their goods, they're going to just start selling to each other and open up new markets that previously hadn't been there. They will grow. They will expand. They will see this financial boom from doing business and trading with everybody in this new coalition. And we, those of us here in the United States, will lose everything. Oh, sure, we'll still have to buy their goods because we depend upon them, and Trump will still have the tariffs, so we'll still pay a higher cost for that. But our goods here in the United States that are already having a hard time selling overseas, just ask any farmer, we will lose those markets. Farmers who are already facing financial ruin, which is exactly what they told Congress about 3 weeks ago, they're going to go under. They will lose everything. Manufacturing here in the United States will go extinct virtually. Because sure, we'll still need to make some things to sell to us here in America, but we're not going to have other countries coming to us, knocking on our door saying, hey, can we buy all this stuff from you? Foreign companies that have invested in the United States, or at least pledged, as Trump says, they'll pull out. They'll go with their new trading partners. They'll move their plants to Canada. Maybe they'll move them to Japan or Europe or anywhere else in Asia or perhaps Mexico. The United States, if this coalition does, do what they're hoping to be able to do, the
U.S. used to be the undisputed center of world trade, not anymore. And for global trade as a whole, that might be a good thing. Let's talk about Trump real quick. America's trade decline started long before he took office, but his protectionist policies, especially in his second term, have only accelerated the U.S. fall. U.S. trade with the rest of the world fell more in the third quarter of 2025 than it did from 2014 to 2024. And U.S. container imports are down since Trump took office the second time. But the rest of the world didn't follow Trump's protectionist lead. Nations reacted by trading more with each other. Trump's tariffs against Beijing in 2018 pushed Chinese exporters to target other markets in Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. As a result, China's trade surplus only continues to grow, even with Trump's new round of tariffs. What's even more interesting is how many other countries are now trading record amounts beyond the US, like Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. And countries are trading more with their regional neighbors as they slowly diversify away from an unreliable US. You can see here that since 2000, regional trade agreements between countries around the world have more than quadrupled, but only a few involve the US. The US is still a massive economy, and some countries, like Mexico and Canada, remain highly integrated. But the shift is a big deal, and growth in global trade now relies heavily on economies in East Asia and Africa, not the US. When countries diversify their supply chains away from the US, they're less susceptible to shocks, and commercial ties historically reduce the risk of armed conflict. But for the US, the shift means less global influence, lower defenses against local economic shocks, and a poorer nation in the long term. Trump and current U.S. trade policy might be good for the rest of the world in the long run, just not the U.S. itself.
But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country.
This week, we are having our first formal negotiations with Mexico on the USMCA.
The American government has indicated to the world that they are having a lot of difficulty negotiating with the Canadian government because the Canadian government refuses to sit down with them or at least understand that they are outmatched.
It would cause a massive disruption. There would be a disruption in stock markets, almost certainly, if he were to do that. This would be a huge blow to the Canadian economy.
Canada is in a complete shock as the U.S. and Mexico move forward with their trade talks, leaving Canada in the dust while Mark Carney's leadership fails to make any real progress. As the U.S. demands unilateral concessions and forces Canadian companies to shift operations south, Carney's ego-driven approach to global trade risks marginalizing Canada on the world stage. If Canada doesn't wake up and act fast, it will find itself irrelevant in North America's economic future, sidelined and powerless in the most crucial negotiations of the decade.
Trump's latest move in the conflict with the Liberal government shows once and for all that Carney is completely outmatched. Now, the United States of America is having a great negotiation with Mexico, and by all accounts, they will have a bilateral trade agreement well and locked in place long before the upcoming renegotiation of the CUSMA or the USMCA.
While Ottawa was busy hosting grand summits and churning out feel-good press releases, Washington and Mexico City were quietly finalizing a deal that changes it all. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has officially confirmed that U.S.-Mexico trade talks are advancing at a serious, structured pace, while Canada's negotiations remain stuck in neutral. So this isn't political gossip. It's a public admission from the highest American trade official that Canada is falling behind, losing ground every day, and its neighbors accelerate without it.
We saw President Trump's directive to the American negotiators last fall to suspend negotiations with Canada. We were in the process of advancing, we thought, in a positive way on the sectoral tariffs. That is the discussion that Mr. Trump suspended.
The U.S. and Mexico are not waiting for Canada to figure itself out. They are building a bilateral trade architecture that serves their interests. And if Canada can't keep up, they will simply lock in agreements that leave Canadian businesses on the outside looking in. This is a nightmare scenario that Canadian economists have been warning about for months. And now it's no longer a warning. It's a reality.
The Canadian government, led by Mark Carney and Mark Carney's ego, and all of the people that surround Mark Carney's ego, seem to think that they are superior intellectually to not only Donald Trump, but all of the negotiating team.
Foundations of the international order, the order which Canada helped to build and from which we have long benefited, that order is crumbling. And many of our former strengths, built on our close ties to the United States, have become our weaknesses. The U.S. has changed. That's their right. And we are responding. That is our imperative. We are responding with speed and ambition, focusing on what we can control, which is to build our strength at home and diversify our partnerships abroad. Abroad, we've secured more than 20 economic and security partnerships across 4 continents in less than a year. We're re-engaging with global giants like India, China, and Brazil. And we're deepening our partnerships with our closest allies, including the European Union, the Nordic countries, and Australia. As a result, we're attracting the strongest investment in the G7. And we're on track to double our non-US exports within a decade.
Now, if you just glance at the tone, because Mark Carney is very polite, and I don't want to stereotype Canadians as polite, although they've always been very polite to me. And I will be back in Canada within just a couple of weeks, and they're going to be polite again. They always are. This is pretty serious. It turns out that having an untrustworthy president as a partner tells you we've got to diversify. And when he says we've doubled non-US imports, that means we are increasingly getting more and more stuff from someone else. This relationship with Canada has been a foundation of Western alliances for decades. And Mark Carney now says it's kind of a liability. The US has changed. Now, this is, of course, their right to change their forward-going economic decisions. And he is also correct that the partnerships with the United States when Trump is president aren't super reliable. They're not super consistent. They're like an on-again, off-again girlfriend where you never know, is she interested today or isn't she? Is she going to be nice today or is she going to be mean? I don't know. Maybe it's not a good analogy. But the point is that the United States has changed. And so he says, well, let's do more with the European Union. Let's do more with the Nordic countries. Let's do more with Australia. Steadier negotiating partners, steadier trade partners. And so this is a major recalibration of these sorts of alliances. And it's not a complicated reason. I've said it before as it applies to Iran and with other parts of the world. If you are a foreign government and you want to plan long-term policy, long-term trade, long-term intelligence sharing, you need predictable partners. You need to know if we get into an agreement, it's going to hold. It's not going to be 10% tariff today and 50% tomorrow, and then we're done next week.
I know it's late, but President Trump posted late tonight that he is cutting off all trade negotiations with Canada because of their quote unquote egregious behavior. What could be so egregious, you say? Well, it's this advertisement. So that's just part of the ad. The basic gist is they are using the voice of former President Ronald Reagan, who was notoriously a free trader and not a real big fan of tariffs. And they are using Reagan's speech from 1987 to sort of push back against President Trump's tariff policy, which, you know, the Canadians and the United States have been fighting over recently. Well, in a Truth Social post tonight. So is it fake? Did Reagan actually say that? Well, I found the actual speech from April of 1987, and I'm going to just play you the full context of what former President Reagan said about tariffs back then. You get to be the judge.
What they have done is engage in this act of economic terrorism against the entire world. They basically threatened any ship that's moving through the Straits of Hormuz. Well, as the President of the United States showed, two can play at that game. And if the Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism, we're going to abide by a simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either. We know that's a big deal to them. We know that applies additional economic leverage. And again, Brett.
Bro, if you want to talk about economic terrorists, I'm pretty sure Iran is not the one that started this war. Iran's not the one that drops like sanctions all over the world, preventing other countries to access the worldwide network, financial network. I'm pretty sure Iran is not the one that tells other countries who they can trade with. I'm pretty sure Iran is not the one that's like strangling Cuba to death. These are just a few things that's on top of my head. One of these days, I hope they realize that they are the villain of the world right now, and they need to learn to start taking responsibility or just own it. Just own it. Like those MAGA pastors, they literally saying it out loud that we need to take people's rights away.
Imagine waking up to find the world has shut its doors. 30 countries, from Canada to Germany to India, just cut off business with the United States overnight. Cargo ships are stranded mid-ocean. Postal warehouses are overflowing with packages that will never reach their destination. And on stage, Donald Trump pounds his fist before a roaring crowd. But behind that curtain, America faces an economic revolt unlike anything seen in a century. The dollar is slipping, factories are stalling, and one by one, even U.S. allies are turning their backs. This isn't a trade dispute, it's a global shutdown. And the question hanging over Washington tonight is chilling. What happens to the world's biggest economy when the world walks away? Subscribe to my channel for daily updates. The spark came from Washington itself. In August 2025, President Donald Trump reinstated steep tariffs on imports from Europe, Asia, and North America. The U.S. International Trade Commission confirmed the average tariff rate soared to 18.6%, the highest level since the infamous Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. Swiss goods were hit with duties as high as 39%, while the European Union faced blanket tariffs of 15% on consumer and industrial products alike. According to the World Trade Organization's September report, these new measures added more than $90 billion in import costs in just 1 month. The impact was immediate, and it hit the smallest items first. Data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection showed that nearly 1.4 billion small packages entered the U.S. last year under the de minimis threshold, exempt from tariffs if valued under $800. But once those exemptions disappeared, 30 foreign postal authorities announced they would no longer process U.S.-bound shipments. Germany's Deutsche Post said compliance costs had become impossible. India Post blamed customs bottlenecks that would cripple delivery times. Mexico's Correos de Mexico called the new system unworkable. And just like that, a blackout fell over everyday consumer goods, from books to electronics, clothing to imported foods. For the average American household, it wasn't theory anymore, it was personal. The Tax Foundation in Washington estimated that existing tariffs had already cost families about $1,300 a year, but that was before the postal suspension. Economists at the Peterson Institute warned the burden could climb by another $600 per household as shortages pushed prices even higher. What began as a debate over trade balances had arrived at America's kitchen tables. Abroad, anger turned political. In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney publicly endorsed a Buy Canadian movement. An Angus Reid poll showed 85% of Canadians had replaced at least one American product with a domestic brand since Trump's tariffs began. Cross-border tourism collapsed. Statistics Canada reported a 23% drop in United States travel, stripping nearly $3 billion Canadian dollars in revenue from American businesses. In Europe, the backlash was no softer. Surveys by the Danish Chamber of Commerce revealed that half of Danish consumers were avoiding American brands altogether. In Sweden, 70% said they were considering a boycott, and 10% had already stopped buying.
We have some pretty major news right now. Donald Trump has successfully alienated America's allies in a way no American president has in recent history. Europe, which has historically been an ally of the United States, has come out today and rebuked the President of the United States of America. And at the same time, countries like Canada, which have historically been America's allies, are cozying up to countries like China, executing new trade deals. China and Russia, America's adversaries, are having a field day this evening. It is a major shift in the world order. Trump is actively alienating his stance and America's stance among critical allies in Europe, breaking apart alliances like NATO in the process, potentially soon, all while allowing our allies to go closer with our adversaries like Russia and China. We are seeing a major shift on the world stage as we speak, and it is urgent that everyone, especially those in America, know what is happening. Make sure to spread the word and follow for more.
Burden that we don't have any real growth in the future. Our entire economy goes to pay off the debt at this point. We've become a schizophrenic superpower, and it's not that Europe, it's not that the global South wanted the destruction of the United States, not that it wanted to deny the United States access to their trade. It's simply that they were pushed to it. And that's why after 25 years, this has just been pushed through. It's out of necessity, and that's what the world's been doing. It's been acting out of necessity to safeguard its own nations and middle powers from the abuses of a superpower like the United States. Because the thing is, nations within the EU, nations within Mercosur, they've really had no other choice but to be backed, or but to choose a side with a superpower. But in 2026, there's really been a movement against that. The unipolar global order is over. And the weaponization of trade policies, the weaponization of trade markets to safeguard smaller middle nations from the superpowers. Like I said, this is something that's really been building this year with Mark Carney announcing that at the World Economic Forum. You've seen a lot of momentum, I gather, especially in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago, with President Luna coming from Brazil, really saying that this needs to happen and this needs to happen now, not just for financial protection of these nations, but for a kind of representation and fairness the middle powers haven't had in the past. So instead of looking to China, looking to Russia, looking to the United States and saying that we have to follow one of these superpowers, they decided, no, we're building a third option. And that's going to give the kind of strategic autonomy that especially the EU has been looking for with a lot of the threats that have been coming from the United States. We have to remember that all throughout South America, all throughout the global South, for my entire lifetime, the US has been operating in a way to destabilize government. So we used to overthrow governments just to keep bananas cheap. Now we're calling countries in South America and they're not answering because they're too busy talking to the French. That's the reality, and that's only going to continue as the benefits from trade deals like these, closed loop trade deals that exclude the United States, really have their effect on the global economy in the middle powers within these trade deals. And the EU looked at America and looked at its leadership and has essentially said that, listen, every 4 years, the pendulum swings and we just cannot keep up with it. We need stable trade actors in which we can build relationships on solid foundations, not something that changes every 4 years with the TikTok algorithm. And they're right. They're right to do so because that is exactly the point. And even the domestic economy in America can't decide what it's going to do. And that's why we've had this period of a stagnant economy where we can point to growth, but at the same time, it doesn't align with inflation. It doesn't align with wage growth. And that's why lifestyle in America, the standard of living of the average America,
Yep. So, y'all, this is going to get worse. And the sad part is it's going to get worse on us because, nobody is doing business like they were before with the United States. So they're going to pass everything that's being lost onto the consumer. And you can see Donald Trump don't care how overwhelmed the people are. There are people crying on videos because they got to pay more money for gas and more money to pay their bills, and their rent is going up, and they're in tears, y'all. And Donald Trump don't care. He doesn't care, but this is going to be our burden to bear because the politicians are going to put this on us. Yes, they are. Loveline, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you again for your super chat. Shalom to everyone in the chat, and shalom to you, and thank you for your support. Audacity Comics, thank you for the super chat. Thank you, Lisa, for always providing such impactful, timely, and thought-provoking stories. Well, thank you for your support. I deeply appreciate it. And that's what I'm not looking forward to. As we get through this year, y'all, it is going to be horrific by the time we get to the end. And I don't know if any of you heard, we know Spirit Airlines has gone under, and Delta is following right in their footsteps right now. Delta is about to go under. It's going to be several airlines that are going to permanently go under, just like Spirit. So this is turning out to be a really interesting year, but they said JetBlue is not doing so well. Delta has canceled hundreds of flights, and there are other airlines that they said they are looking at that are in the red. So you may actually see several of them that's been around for a long time that will permanently close their doors, permanently. So, yes, absolutely stay prayed up. Yes, Delta has been canceled over the last several days. They've been canceling all kinds of flights, and that's what Spirit did before they announced they were closing. So Delta is showing all the same signs. So y'all, yeah, we're in some very interesting times. We are, but we must stay prayed up and stay focused. Some of the things are going to be shocking, but we have an agenda with the Most High, and we must stick with it no matter what happens to this country. So, y'all, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. Thank you so much for being here. I have to run an errand that's going to probably take up a few hours of my time. That's why I did not post my next live. I'm going to wait until I get home, and then I will post at that time because I just don't know how long I'm going to be gone at this point. So, y'all, have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I will see you later. Shalom, family.